You didn't click this because you wanted to hear silver is up. You clicked because something feels different. Silver isn't behaving like a sleepy commodity anymore. It's behaving like a door that was supposed to stay open, suddenly slamming halfway shut. And the spark people are missing isn't coming from a miner. It isn't coming from a central bank. It isn't coming from a meme. It's coming from a blueprint. A battery blueprint. Samsung's solid-state battery work put a very specific idea back on the table. A silver carbon composite layer on the anode side. A micrometer scale layer that helps stabilize lithium metal behavior in an all solid-state design. That sounds small, that sounds harmless. And that's exactly how supply chains die. Not because one company uses all the metal, but because one architecture becomes credible, then copyable, then standard, and the entire industry stampedes toward the same bottleneck at the same time. Today's video is called Samsung's Silver Demand Just Triggered the Ultimate Squeeze. And I'm going to tell you this the way a supply chain experiences it. Fast, chaotic, and brutally mechanical. No conspiracy cosplay. No fantasy. Just structure. Because silver doesn't have to disappear for a squeeze to explode. It only has to get tight enough that industrial buyers stop trusting the market. And once trust breaks, the exit doors start locking. Not for sellers, for buyers. Let's start with the one thing that changes everything. Regime shift. When a metal that spent decades capped under a psychological ceiling suddenly starts living above that ceiling, you don't just get a higher price. Ways. You get a different personality. You get a market where risk models start panicking, hedges start failing, and liquidity starts behaving like it's allergic to size. And that's the environment where a story like Samsung's doesn't just add demand, it changes behavior. And behavior is what triggers ultimate squeezes. Because markets don't break when demand increases slowly. Markets break when everyone realizes the same thing at the same time. I need certainty, and I don't trust the spot market to give it to me when I need it. That realization is the match. Now, here's the first lie that melts when the match hits. There's plenty of silver. Look at inventory totals. Inventory totals are not availability. Say it again. Because this is the entire video. Inventory totals are not availability. Availability means the right bars in the right form, in the right place, on the right schedule, delivered with terms that don't hurt. A spreadsheet can show a mountain of metal. A procurement officer can still hear the same sentence from 10 different suppliers, not available for prompt. Not in that form, not at that size, not at that price, not without a premium, not without a longer lead time, not unless you're a priority client. That's what a squeeze looks like in real life. It's not a headline screaming out of silver. It's silence in the quote inbox. Now here's the second lie. Industrial demand is stable. It grows slowly. That was true in a world where demand was mostly jewelry, photography, and coins. We don't live in that world. Now you've got electrification, grids, data centers, solar manufacturing, electronics density, and a broader infrastructure everything era. Industrial demand isn't a trend anymore. It's a baseline. And when industrial demand becomes baseline, the market becomes sensitive. It becomes a system that can look normal until it gets bumped. And Samsung's battery blueprint is a bump that changes the way industries think. Because it signals a future where silver isn't just money. Silver becomes a functional layer in a next generation platform. And platforms create copycats. Copycats create synchronized demand. Synchronized demand is what breaks markets. So here's the mechanism, step by step, in plain language. Step 1, a credible blueprint appears. When a top-tier industrial player shows a plausible path to solid-state performance improvements, higher energy density, better cycle life, safer operation, and silver is part of the mechanism, it tells the world. Silver might be doing a job we can't easily replace. That's not a demand number. That's an expectation grenade. Because markets don't wait for demand to fully arrive. They reprice the risk that demand will arrive. Step 2, the replication race begins. In batteries, when something looks like it solves a hard problem, like stabilizing lithium metal behavior, the ecosystem responds like a swarm. Labs replicate. Startups replicate. Suppliers start preparing. Pilot lines test. OEMs ask for samples. Procurement teams quietly start modeling future needs. And then the supply chain does what supply chains always do when uncertainty rises. They overorder. They pull forward purchases. They lock longer contracts. They hoard just in case. This is the part retail doesn't see. Retail sees price. Procurement sees risk. And procurement doesn't care about your chart. Procurement cares about one terrifying sentence. Our line can't stop. Step 3. The market structure was already stressed. This is what makes the timing dangerous. Silver has been in an environment where people have been talking about tightness, deficits, and structural pressure for years. And here's the key. In a stressed system, you don't need a huge new demand source to cause chaos. You need a catalyst that changes behavior. Samsung's silver-linked solid-state story is that catalyst. Not because Samsung alone buys everything, because Samsung can legitimize a new lane of strategic demand. And once a lane is legitimized, everyone models it. Once everyone models it, they pre-position. And once they pre-position, the float shrinks. And once the float shrinks, the market becomes violent. Now we get to the part that turns this into an ultimate squeeze. Silver isn't one market. It's two markets stacked on top of each other. The paper world and the physical world. The paper world is deep until everyone tries to exit at once. The physical world looks fine until people demand certainty instead of price. And when physical tightens, paper discovers it's standing on a narrow bridge. How do you see physical stress before the headlines? You see it in the cost of borrowing real metal. You see it in lease rates. Lease rates are the heartbeat of how hard is it to source physical silver right now. When leasing is cheap, metal is loose. When leasing spikes, the market is telling you quietly, without drama, metal is not as available as it looks, is when I want of this is. And when that heartbeat gets erratic, when borrowing conditions get stressed, the smartest participants don't argue. They secure supply. And that behavior tightens the structure even more. This is how the trap forms. Because the trap is not shorts are evil. Shorts exist for normal reasons in commodities. Producers hedge future output. Fabricators hedge input costs. Dealers hedge inventory exposure. Banks and market makers provide liquidity. In a calm market, short exposure is part of the machine. But here's the trap. Normal short exposure becomes lethal when a market shifts regimes. Because in a new regime, the short is no longer routine. It becomes a timer. And the timer has 3 fuses burning at once. Fuse 1, price pressure. As price rises, mark-to-market losses grow. Fuse 2, margin pressure. As volatility rises, collateral demands rise. Fuse 3, financing pressure. As physical tightens, the cost to borrow metal rises. This is where the squeeze stops being a story and becomes a machine. Price rises, shorts bleed, margin rises, risk desks reduce exposure, shorts cover, price rises again. That's the squeeze loop. Now add the Samsung catalyst. Because Samsung's story does something psychologically violent. It suggests a future where silver is not optional demand. It's required demand. Optional demand can vanish when price goes up. Required demand pays up or breaks. That's why markets fear required demand. Because required demand doesn't negotiate. It escalates. It signs contracts. It locks supply. It moves metal into strong hands. And strong hands don't sell easily. Now, I want you to understand how thin layers still matter. Because this is where people get lazy and say, it's micrometers. That's nothing. But supply chains don't care about thickness. They care about replication at scale. If an architecture is copied across millions of battery cells, and that layer is part of the standard stack, it becomes a permanent pull. It becomes a baseline. And the moment silver becomes baseline inside a battery future, the market starts treating silver as strategic. Strategic commodities don't behave like normal commodities. They behave like insurance. And when people think they might need more insurance, they don't sell it. They hoard it. That's why the ultimate squeeze is not about an ounce number per device. Be careful with viral claims. We don't have a public commercial bill of materials for future packs. The correct way to think is not exact ounces per car. The correct way to think is, if the industry believes silver is a stabilizing layer and solid state begins scaling, then competition for deliverable metal intensifies and availability becomes the real battlefield. That's the mechanism. Now, we stack it with the other giant demand lane nobody can ignore: solar. Solar isn't a small consumer. Solar is one of the biggest industrial lanes in silver demand. And solar has a special property. It uses silver in a way that's process critical. Metallization, silver paste, finger lines, bus bars. This matters because silver in solar is not a decorative choice. It's baked into the current manufacturing ecosystem. And yes, the industry can thrift silver over time. Yes, the industry can move toward copper approaches, but eventually is not the same as this year. Substitution takes time, and time is exactly what squeezes steel. So now you have the nightmare stack: a silver market that's already sensitive, a solar industry that can't instantly remove silver without pain, a broader electrification era that keeps baseline industrial demand high, and then a battery blueprint that implies a new strategic lane may be forming. That's how you get the ultimate squeeze. Not one driver, multiple drivers colliding in the same calendar window. Now let's talk about what exit doors lock actually means, because people misunderstand this. Exit doors don't lock with a press conference. They lock with terms. They lock when the dealer stops giving friendly quotes. They lock when the quote expires in hours. They lock when the supplier says allocation. They lock when the price on screen is no longer the price for size. They lock when the premium becomes the real price of certainty. They lock when delivery timelines stretch. And the most brutal part, the public notices last, because the public watches charts. The supply chain watches availability. In a real squeeze, people don't ask for price first. They ask, do you have metal? Do you have metal for prompt? Can you guarantee delivery? Can you guarantee it again next month? Because when the system is loose, price is the question. When the system is tight, access is the question. That's the shift we're in. Now, if you want to understand why this squeeze is exploding right now, you need the psychology of regime shifts. When a market breaks into territory it hasn't lived in for decades, it creates two crowds simultaneously. Crowd one, the late buyers, terrified of missing the move. Crowd two, the shorts, terrified of staying short. Both crowds hit the market at the same time. That's why squeezes come in waves. Not one explosion, repeated detonations. Each wave clears weak hands, forces more covering, and transfers more metal into stronger hands. And the longer that continues, the more one way the market becomes, because the float shrinks. This is where the squeeze starts feeling unfair, because the market begins to behave like a staircase: violent upswings, sharp smashdowns, then higher highs. Because squeezes don't move in straight lines. They move like a war. Ambush, retreat, push, counter-push. And each cycle does the same thing. It removes metal from the maybe sellers and places it into no sellers. That is how the exit doors lock. Now, let's address the obvious question. Okay, but why can't supply just respond? Because silver supply is not elastic. A huge portion of silver is produced as a byproduct of other metals, meaning you can't just flip a switch and mine twice as much silver next quarter. Even if price is higher, supply response is slow. Demand shocks are fast. That mismatch is why squeezes happen. And it's why new strategic demand narratives matter so much, because they don't need to be fully real today to change behavior today. Now we bring it back to Samsung. Samsung's silver carbon layer is not a marketing gimmick. It is a plausible technical solution to a hard battery problem. And when a plausible solution appears, the industry reacts like a stampede. Not because it's guaranteed, because nobody wants to be late if it becomes the standard. This is the same behavior that has broken other commodity inputs. Validation, replication, pre-buying, supply tightness, repricing, stress, signals, rationing. Silver is susceptible because it's already pulled in multiple directions. And when you add one more direction, especially a future platform direction, like batteries, you don't just add ounces, you add fear. And fear is what turns tight markets into violent markets. So what do you watch next? If you want to track this like a strategist, you don't stare at the candle chart and pray. You watch structure. You watch the cost of borrowing metal. You watch premiums. You watch whether physical tightness persists even when price pulls back. You watch whether industrial talk shifts from optimized cost to secure flow. You watch whether supply chains start saying the words that always appear before rationing. Priority clients, allocation, lead time, guaranteed delivery, minimum order, long-term contract, strategic inventory. Because when that language appears, the squeeze is not a trader story. It's a procurement story. And procurement stories end in one of two ways. Price rises enough to force someone to sell, or substitution accelerates enough to reduce demand. And substitution takes time, which is why once the squeeze mechanism starts, it tends to move in waves. Now let me give you 3 scenarios, because you need a framework, not a prediction. Scenario A, the blueprint stays a blueprint. Solid state remains mostly lab and pilot. Battery silver demand stays mostly narrative. In this world, silver can still be strong, but squeezes are shorter, and volatility remains the main event. Scenario B, the blueprint becomes a race. OEMs and suppliers start scaling pilots, locking inputs, and securing metal. In this world, the market starts paying for certainty. Premiums stay stubborn, borrowing costs stay elevated, and pullbacks get bought harder. Scenario C, the blueprint becomes a standard. Silver becomes part of the expected stack for next-gen battery platform. That's when the squeeze stops being a chart event and becomes an industrial policy event. Contracts, allocation, and prices that feel offensive because they have to ration demand. If you understand those 3 scenarios, you understand why a micrometer scale layer can move a global market. Not because it's thick, because it's copied, because it's required, because it arrives on top of a market that is already sensitive. So no, Samsung did not single-handedly create a squeeze, but Samsung's work can act like an accelerant because it tells the world there is a plausible future where silver is embedded in the battery stack. And once the world believes a plausible future exists, capital moves before factories do. That is how ultimate squeezes begin. Now let me close by painting the scene the way it actually feels inside a metals desk when this kind of story hits. It's early morning, screens are green, then red, then green again. Your phone is buzzing with the same sentence spoken in different accents. Do you have metal? Do you have metal for prompt? Can you guarantee it? Can you guarantee it again next month? And that's when you realize the most brutal truth in commodities. When the system is loose, price is the question. When the system tightens, access is the question. And when access becomes the question, the exit doors are already halfway closed. So yes, the trap is set, because if silver becomes even slightly more embedded in the battery future, then silver isn't just money, it's infrastructure. It's the bridge metal. It's the thing that touches everything. And in a world trying to scale electrification, compute, mobility, and energy all at once, the metal that touches everything becomes the metal everyone fights for.